You're listening to A Slice of Therapy with me, Alun Parry. So in today's episode, what I want to look at is how to look forward on New Year's Day. Now, New Year's Day is often a time for New Year's resolutions, but I'm not going to be looking at that. I'm going to be giving you a process that I always use myself around this time of year to reflect on the year that's just been gone and to help use that to look forward at the year that is awaiting us. And so rather than New Year's resolutions, I'm going to be looking at 3 different questions to apply to different areas of life. Now, you'll see lots of things around about this time where people talk to you about things that you can do in order to improve yourself, and they often have quite an admonishing tone, I suppose, I notice. So the questions in this process are a lot nicer, I think, and a lot more fruitful as a result. And so in this podcast, I'm going to look at 3 things. First of all, what went well? Second of all, how did you manage to get it to go well? And thirdly, what would you like to be different in this year ahead? Now, when I apply this process, I like to kind of break life down into a series of different categories, so that rather than just looking at life generally, which can be a bit overwhelming, you can get a little bit more specific and focused. So it's up to you what categories that you choose, but I pick things like career, finances, friendship, intimate relationships, where I live, my home. I'll pick things like my learning, my creativity, my joy, all these kind of things that allow me just to have a little bit of focus. So I'm not just looking at life generally, but I can apply these questions to each specific area of life. And the categories aren't fixed, whichever suit you, but that's just, off the top of my head, some of the categories that I tend to look at. So let's look at that first question. What has gone well? Now, it's a strange question because often when we're looking for self-improvement, we'll be invited to kind of beat ourselves up and find the things in our life that aren't going well so that we can change them. But I find that as well as being more validating and more self-appreciative, that there are just as many, if not more, lessons in what's going well. And so it's been a funny old year, hasn't it? Not funny ha-ha, but certainly funny peculiar. Who would have thought this time last year that we'd have had the year that we've had, in the midst of a pandemic? And amongst that year, as you break life into those different categories, I'm sure it'd be very easy to find things that haven't gone so well. And so it's helpful, I think, especially because it's not our natural inclination necessarily, to actually ask that question. What has gone well? Now, some people might think, and I've had people say to me, but it's been terrible. And what I would say is that it is especially in those areas of life that have gone bad, that it's much more useful in those in particular to find those things that actually did go well nonetheless. So in each area of life, just ask yourself that question, what's gone well? It might have even gone terribly overall, but amidst that, despite that, what are the aspects that you would point to where you'd say, well, this actually went well? Now, it might just be a moment, or it might be something more sustained. It might have showed up just for a little while. It might just be that things have been at a pretty low ebb, but that bit wasn't quite as low. However you're going to define this, what are the kind of high spots there? What are the things that went well for you in each of these areas? And make a note of them. I always find it's a very positive thing to do because it gets me to realise that actually I did create a lot of good in that time once I sit down and think about it. And it gives me a positive sense of what's happened and a positive sense of what I was able to create, even in the midst of struggle. So that's the first question. What's actually gone well in each of those areas? The second question is, what is it that you did that ensured that that thing that went well actually happened? Because it didn't just come about from nowhere. You've actually created that. So what is it that you did in order to create that, in order to produce that? What were the actions that you took? What were the circumstances that were in place? What was the attitude that you had that helped that thing that went well to happen? Now, it's a great question, this, because, well, first of all, it allows you quite rightly to take some of the credit for this. And when you start to take some of the credit for this, and you start to understand why these things happened, and that actually you had something to do with it, it allows you to connect to the strategies and resources and techniques that you've built that you can use again. And so once you've identified what's gone well and you've got a better sense of how that thing that went well came into being, it allows you to repeat it. It allows you to have a better chance of getting that thing again. It allows you even to expand and get more of that. So you might realise, for instance, that you approached it with a certain attitude. You might realise that there were certain circumstances or others that aided you. You might realise that there was a certain technique that you did that helped this happen. And once you realise that, you can put them in place again in order to get more of it going forward. So it's a really useful question because it helps you understand how you created the good stuff. Now, sometimes, we have a tendency not to take the credit. We have the tendency to just give all the credit to some outside event. It might be, well, the weather was nice on that day, or, I don't know, somebody else came in and helped things along, or I had a stroke of luck. And it may well be true that some external events have helped you along, but like anything, when something comes along to help us, we can either go along with the flow of that help or we can get in its way. And so even if there was something external that you noticed seemed really helpful in creating that thing that went well, still take some credit, still look at yourself and ask yourself the question, well, what did I do to help that external thing along rather than get in its way? If there was a period of nice weather that made this nice thing happen, what did I do in response to the nice weather that really ensured that I made the most of it and managed to milk it and managed to ensure that that positive thing was actually traded in, was actually cashed in, and I was able to not stop the good thing from happening? Because we get in our own way sometimes, and it sounds like even if this good thing that happened, this thing that went well occurred, and even if there was some sort of external force that was a big ingredient in it happening, you still have a role in that. And so have a look at yourself, even if there is an external force that helped things along, because you didn't get in that external force's way, and there are things that you did that helped it to do its thing. So we've seen the first two questions for each of these areas of life. The first one is what went well, and the second is how? What did I do in order to ensure that it went well? Now, the third question is a positive question as well, which is, what would I like different going forward? So if things could get better again, we've already established that even if it was quite a bumpy ride, there were certain things that did go well. So if things were to get better again, if we were to change things so that things were different to some extent, and that difference was in our favour, what would they be? Now, notice that I'm not asking you how you would get there, because that can be quite a stopping, it stops you in your tracks, the question of how sometimes. I'm just asking you to paint a picture, really, to get a sense of if things were different and that difference was in your favour, what would those differences be that would mean that things were a little bit better again? And that question's really useful because in each area of life, it gives you a clear vision then of how you'd like things to be moving forward. And when we know where we're going, like in the broad direction that we're headed in, we just naturally, instinctively start taking actions towards that, start taking the next steps towards that. And so as you can see, this is a really positive way of reflecting on the year that's just been in such a way that it allows you to recreate the best of the year moving forward and even grow the best of the year going forward and expand on it by getting some sort of vision of what an even better year would look like going forward. So let's just have a recap then. So we've looked at this idea of having a review of the year and a vision of the year coming forward. Needn't be a negative exercise. It should really be a positive one. It should uplift you really and connect you to your resources. And we saw as well, didn't we, that if you were to just reflect on the whole of life, that's quite hard. So it makes sense to break things into categories like friendship or finances or intimate relationship or where you live or health and fitness or whatever it happens to be for you. And when you look in each of those categories, there were 3 questions to ask. The first is, what has gone well in that category? There might have been plenty of stuff, even an overwhelming amount of stuff that didn't, but let's not focus on that just now. The first question is, what went well in that category? The second question to reflect on your year is, how did you make that happen? How did that thing that went well occur? And what was it that you did in order to bring that into being? And the third one, looking forward, is, what is it that you would like to be different going forward? If there were some changes that made life a little bit better again than it was last year, what would those differences be? And so by the end of these 3 questions of what went well, how did I do that, and what positive differences would I want moving forward, you get a sense of, first of all, the fact that you are able to create good things and that you did create good things. Secondly, you get a sense of your own resources, strategies, techniques and allies so that you can recreate them and even expand them. And thirdly, you paint a vision of the year that would be an improvement again on the last one, that would take you a couple of steps forward in the year ahead. And so once you've done that exercise, hopefully you can feel really positive about yourself and really positive and uplifted about the year that is awaiting us. If you found this episode useful, please do share it so other people can get the benefits as well. If you'd like to work with me directly, I'm Alun Parry, and you can find more about me at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. And of course, you don't have to be local to me because I work online, so you can be based absolutely anywhere. And of course, please subscribe to the podcast as well, because it's absolutely free and it means that you'll never miss an episode again. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you again on the next one.